Hello, I'm here with Dr. Rothenberg today for a few more questions. These are about comorbid conditions and symptoms that you'd see in the clinic. So for eosinophilic gastrointestinal disorders, what is the current research on these and mast cell disorders occurring together?
Well, when we first described eosinophilic esophagitis, we obviously used the name eosinophilic because we were highly impressed by the stunning and marked accumulation and levels of eosinophils in the biopsies that we were getting, and therefore the diseases were named after these cells. When, however, we began to do deep molecular and cellular probing of the tissue, we found out that mast cells were also very prevalent and were actually activated, and they were at substantial levels, much higher than we would normally see. So, this is, this is reflective of the fact that these diseases, although called eosinophilic GI disease or EGID, are not only related to eosinophils, but there are a number of other inflammatory cells that are involved in the disease and likely driving some of the clinical manifestations of the disease. It does turn out that mast cells and eosinophils are cousin cells. They are hallmark cells involved in allergy. And if you look them up in a textbook of blood cells, you'll see that they often might be in the same chapter because they are involved in similar responses and they're actually regulated by the same related pathways related to these cytokines. They do different things. They are involved in somewhat different reactions related to the allergy response. But the bottom line is that EOE and related EGID disorders are just eosinophil diseases. They are associated with other cells, and mast cells are certainly likely to be very important in these diseases as well.
Another one about a comorbid condition is hypermobility. Has understanding of the role of hypermobility in eosinophilic gastrointestinal disorders changed over the last few years? Is it thought to be present at higher rates than previously thought? Is it possible that hypermobility could be a nutritional or mitochondrial consequence of eosinophilic gastrointestinal disorders instead of a co-occurring congenital condition?
Everything's possible.
These are great questions.
Yeah, they are. But in terms of the relationship between eosinophilic GI disease and hypermobility, this is a fascinating subject area. We actually here at Cincinnati Children's are, I think, the first to make the connection. And when we did, people were surprised by the observation because we found that the diseases were co-occurring together at a high rate, and the EOE was a risk factor for hypermobility syndrome, and hypermobility syndrome was a risk factor for EOE. We now know that this has been replicated and seen in other institutions, and this association is bona fide and it's substantial. We are interested in this for a number of reasons. One is we need to obviously make patients feel better, and having hypermobility syndromes along with EOE makes it even more complex to treat a patient, and we need to do a very good job to make sure that the patient is treated holistically, and that's one of our main drivers initially is to heal both the esophagitis and the GI disease, but also the manifestations of the hypermobility, and to make patients cope best with both of these diseases. So our patients that have these diseases are seen by specialists in hypermobility as well as EOE, and work side by side to develop the best treatment plan. From a research point of view, which happens to be my passion, we need to understand what this connection means scientifically. And we do know that some of the hypermobility syndromes are caused by particular diseases that are often Mendelian traits. So there are specific single genes that cause some of the hypermobility syndromes, and in fact, if a patient has some of these, they have a high rate of EOE. And what that means is that these specific genetic changes, which you might call in these cases mutations, are sufficient to cause eosinophilic GI disease. And this is a rare presentation for eosinophilic GI disease, but it does tell us some fundamental information about the steps that lead to the disease, and we believe that these are also operational to other degrees of magnitude in patients without these Mendelian traits. Now, let me be a little bit more, specific. But by saying, in rare cases of hypermobility syndrome, there are diseases such as Marfan syndrome and also Loeys-Dietz syndrome that are caused by mutations in a single gene. In this case, the gene that encodes for a receptor, for the TGF-beta receptor. And if you have this mutation in this receptor, you do have hypermobility. Of course, hypermobility isn't just in the joints, but it can be in other muscles in the body, such as the heart, and that's certainly a concern for people that have that particular problem, because they do have cardiac manifestations. But we do know now that the TGF-beta is now important in EOE, and a lot of our research is to try to understand how a mutation in the TGF-beta receptor can cause EOE. And what does this mean for patients with or without hypermobility syndrome? What it means is that you can count on us for researching this, taking all leads that we get, and to dive into them on a highest possible level. And in this case, we know more about these hypermobility syndromes than EOE, so it allows us to advance the EOE field by applying the knowledge of the hypermobility syndrome. In this case, we have, for example, certain drugs that are used for hypermobility syndrome, and we can now consider using them for EOE, whether it's with the hypermobility syndrome or not, and that led to one of our current clinical trials, for example, looking at losartan, which it's a blood pressure medication, but one of its modes of action is to lower TGF-beta. So we are researching that, and that illustrates how we can use this information, this connection to research to advance the treatment and understanding of EOE.